they should have been rescued, and what was the role of the volunteers. We'll talk to Yury Butusov, the editor of Censored.net, Diana Makarova, who is from the Makarov Foundation, and Natalia Voronkova from the Volunteer 100 company. Good afternoon. Maybe this briefing is up to date because we have just come back today at 7 a.m. from there, including from Block Post 31. So we decided to talk to you and tell you about why we went there, what was the role of volunteers and the entire public in the rescue of guys from road checkpoint number 32. First of all, we are so much grateful to guys not only from number 32 but from number 31 as well, because as soon as we went there, we heard that they are supposed to take part in rotation, but guys from 31 said they won't go anywhere until the situation with the 32 is solved. You maybe have read already the interviews with them about deliveries that they had. Diana is representative of Makarov Foundation, who was constantly in communication with them. First of all, we were able to take a picture of the ultimatum to road checkpoint 32, which was instrumental in solving the decision. We have short interviews with guys from 31 who said they will never go until the situation with road checkpoint 32 is decided. When the generals came, you should have listened to how they talked to the generals. We worked with road checkpoint 32 for almost a month and a half. Since the beginning, in September, our internal troops were there and they were almost surrounded. One of our delivery men has tread a small pass there. Then there was a rotation and National Guards came there. The separatists got to know about this path and they surrounded the road checkpoint 32 completely. The guys were without water, without food, without warm uniform. They were shelled. They called us on the phone when they had no force at all. They took this delivery man from his route and he went there and got to know the real picture, because all the calls like this should be very much checked. There's a lot of hysterics in the internet. So in order to understand that this is real, you have to be there and check. So the delivery man reported to me and we tried to write about this on the net, and then we decided to go there ourselves because we understood that several days more and the guys would start to die out of exhaustion. I got to know about the situation on the road checkpoint 32 because the relatives of the soldiers and officers started to write and telephone. So in principle, I had a huge volume of information from the very start that allowed to have an idea of what was going there. So having information from inside every day since the situation became to began to get sharper. We have to say that, regrettably, the command from the very start was providing false information to the public, and I think this is the most critical from what was happening on road checkpoint 32, because when the commander-in-chief makes false, non-adequate statements about the situation, this means that there's a question whether he is adequately informed about the entire situation on the front line. I don't understand why the commander-in-chief was making statements like there's no, they are not surrounded, they get deliveries, that the soldiers were calling from Donetsk. This was what demoralized the personnel, not the surrounding, not the suffering that they endured. I think that if the military command from the very start were honest, at least with themselves, then there would not have been the sharpening of the situation. You know, the situation started to evolve since the 5th of September. There were serious combat clashes that became worse after the 4th of October. Instead of reinforcing the troops there, our commanders have just made a rotation of personnel. A month ago, the commander-in-chief said that we should go away from the tactics of block posts because it does not allow to win the war. This is a classical example. When we are overwhelmed by personnel and armored machinery and artillery of the enemy, there was no point in keeping those guys at this road checkpoint. I think that the commanders who allow the personnel who are not provided with water or warm uniform are still at war. I think that this military command is out of competence at all. How can you conduct combat action if you do not provide even water to those men? There was an information about a battle on the 15th of October. There was a convoy, but they did not have enough personnel and they had not artillery support. The convoy was defeated. As a result, they only delivered 200 liters of water for 16 people. And of course, this was a 116 soldiers. And such a unit which is not provided with water loses its compatibility within 2 or 3 days. You can have every kind of a soldier there, even U.S. Navy SEALs, but if they are not warmly clothed or they do not have drinking water, they just cannot take part in combat actions. The people who allow for such a level of operative planning, the Chief of Staff, Viktor Mushenko, are not worth having in the Ukrainian army at all. They should go to road checkpoints themselves and try to fulfill the tasks that they set before the troops. So the command has put our units in bad operative tactical conditions. As a result, instead of demonstrating professionalism, we again have to demonstrate the heroism of soldiers and officers. Regrettably, our combat actions in many similar situations, Ilovaisk was different from the 32 road checkpoints. 32 is different in only one point, that the commander of the sector has not hidden somewhere, but was with the troops. And if they were sitting for so many days under Ilovaisk, then they would be a lot more dead people. How can you hold your ground in such conditions? This is absurd. And if there are no conclusions, there was a parliamentary commission. Mushenko and the then Minister of Defense have just fled from them. And now we again have to conduct an investigation on the issue of road checkpoint 32. It should be public because the General Staff does not draw any conclusions from defeats that lead to many losses. As a result, one fighter died at the road checkpoint, and from the units who tried to break through, at least 15 our military personnel died, and those losses could have been avoided. The inadequate assessment of the situation again led to losses, and people have to demonstrate their heroism, but the responsibility is again shifted from the border loops, shoulder loops of generals to officers and soldiers who are there on the front line. And this is the responsibility as well of the commander of the Sector A, General Kolesnikov. This is just a shame that people who have such a high military rank are afraid of looking facts and truth in the face. Until the command starts to be responsible for this, and until the commander-in-chief starts to objectively investigate the mistakes and see his own responsibility in this absurd operative planning, it is impossible to wage a war. Those crises are being provoked by the illiterate military command. This is just a complete ignoring of military statutes.
And one more thing, they didn't have any ammunition left. They had 2 boxes of ammunition, 5.42, 7.62. They were surrounded by tanks and Grad systems. They were told to fight with machine guns against Grad systems and tanks. Is it 1941, or are we living in the 21st century? Probably I would like to make conclusions to sum it up. Why did we have to liberate checkpoint 32? Because they were encircled. There was a chance to take them out of there with equipment and weapons. Because they were without water, they were without food. And there was no chance to supply that to them, because we know that the truck that was promised, only some water arrived, 2 packs of cigarettes, 5 loaves of bread, and some clothes and some cans. That was all that separatists allowed to take there. So once there was an agreement to let them out, that had to be done. It cannot be the experience which will be repeated at that checkpoint, which is encircled. But we need to make conclusions. They have to understand themselves where there is a distortion of information. I don't think that the commanders of checkpoints provide wrong information about where they are. The information that gets to our president is distorted somewhere. There should be people who are guilty identified, who distorts the information. Then the mistakes are to be recognized, why such encirclement was allowed, and what is to be done to not to have that situation in the future. We shouldn't get into such situations in the future. Thank you. Yury Butusov, who do you think is distorting the information? I think that the distortion of information is taking place at the level of interpretation of facts. There's no single center, analytical center of decision making. There's no staff of the chief commander, and that is according to our legislation. According to our regulations, it is provided that there should be such a staff. There's no coordination of all intelligence services. Every general reports about something, and there should be one person, and only one person. The president has to make a decision, and he's a civilian, and he cannot organize the work in such a way that there is the responsibility of those who give data. There is no analytical structure. General Muzhenko, as I see, looking at his level, he's probably a good commander of a battalion, but he's not a commander of troops. He turned the general staff into the office where they process all his orders, only do the paperwork. We conduct the warfare ignoring the norms of the statute, and the decisions are made based on some personal understanding, and it's made by Muzhenko, and Muzhenko tells the president what the president wants to hear from him. That was the case within Ilovaisk. No one is responsible for anything. Muzhenko said in Ilovaisk the problem was that reserves were 3 days late, and the president talks about that. The whole problem is because the reserves were late, but because of that, being late, someone gets killed. So if you are late a little bit, that means that you are guilty and you are the reason for defeat. You are responsible. So there should be people responsible and guilty for these situations, and till this doesn't happen, the generals do not care. If we allow any unit to be encircled, then it would be correct if some commander is sitting in this encirclement like General Khamchak did, and then the decision was made to break through. Those people shouldn't be there for 2 weeks in these conditions when the enemy prevails. There's no water, there's no food. Why should they be sitting there? We have the army, but instead of using this platoon, 116 infantrymen, we kept them without water for 2 weeks, and these are not soldiers, these are people who have to be rescued, because without water any unit will not be able to fight. But somehow the head of the general staff and the chief commander do not understand that. Probably we need to analyze the mistake of not just these people in the front line, but the parliamentary commission has to examine the actions of the commander-in-chief, and they have to understand where the information gets distorted, why the president 3 times gave the wrong information, why he said that the water was supplied when the water was supplied only in 24 hours. Who allowed him to make such mistakes? And he has to take the responsibility for such lies. If he cannot do it after what happened in the front, then someone has to take him to responsibility. We have the military prosecutor's office, we have the Verkhovna Rada, and someone has to ask questions to the first person who's up there. Evgenia Garkov, 1+1 channel. I have a question to you, Yury. checkpoint 32 went out, but what could be the danger? There is also checkpoint 32, and what have we lost? We lost a piece of the territory which is under the control of Ukrainian forces according to Minsk agreement. Having lost this bit of our land, we recognize that we accept that Russian Federation doesn't observe Minsk agreement. We allowed terrorists during the ceasefire to encircle our troops. We were looking at how they were encircling us, at how they blocked the road, how they stopped supplies, and then they eliminated 2 columns of trucks that were bringing support, and we continue to observe the ceasefire. That's absurd. If the war is going on there, then at that moment when they were getting into groups and they were doing it slowly, the reserves were to be sent there. If the enemy starts firing, they had to fire at them, because we were acting on the land which is Ukrainian land according to Minsk agreements. It's not even airport. We shouldn't withdraw from there. We left our territory. We did not defend it. We did not use the artillery because of the regime of ceasefire. The Russian mercenaries can attack and we cannot defend. We had big losses in the result of that. With all these breakthroughs, people got killed, many people. We still do not know what is the exact number of people killed. They do not know that. What's happening? Because the generals are not planning, and then when the situation in the front is difficult, then they call upon for volunteers, and these people go there. And there are 15 of such heroes who were killed when they were trying to support Checkpoint 32. And the guys from Checkpoint 32 believe that there are more of such heroes. But what I've heard from the officers and soldiers, they say that after 8 bodies were taken out, they believe that there might be up to 20 bodies there. The tanker who they failed to find, up to 20 bodies might be there. Because that is how in August, Russian troops were offending. But now there are 2 points of tension. Near Bakhmut, Kasmiel, Shastya, that's one region, and the region of Donetsk airport. So is it impossible to organize supplies, warm clothes, munition reserves to these 2 hot points? The enemy gets concentrated troops there. These are the same units. They get united, and this way they have the bigger numbers of equipment and personnel, and only Ukrainian troops cannot do that. They have some gangs, and we have 14 brigades in the structure of armed forces, and we do not use them in concentrated way because Muzhenka uses them platoon by platoon at the front, which is 200 kilometers long. We are not concentrating forces, and that makes more difficult to supply, to manage.
And this makes it impossible to create superiority on a certain direction. The impression is that Muzhenko is reading a textbook for the first year of a military academy and has an idea to start to break any rule, starting from the Battle of Cannes, and just crosses out everything that is written there as if there were no wars before that. I want to speak on, is there any information on the road checkpoint 31? I'm interested about the situation there. I have just told you I have just spoken to Brigade 80, and we are constantly in communication with the road checkpoint 31. Now there's a threat that it will be surrounded. And as soon as road checkpoint 32 was evacuated, they started to fire from Grad batteries against the road checkpoint 29. And there's a threat about of surrounding of road checkpoint 31. Whom do you inform about the danger? I talked about this with the Minister of Defense. What's the reaction? The minister, as far as I know, has been in communication with everybody there. He has every information, but in the anti-terrorist operation zone, the movement of the troops is being overseen and organized by the Chief of Staff. So the Minister of Defense cannot adopt decisions because the chain of command is like this: the Commander-in-Chief, the Chief of Staff, and then the Commander of the anti-terrorist operation. The Minister of Defense cannot command the wars. I try to understand why the information is so different. I have just seen a page on the Facebook where Yury Butusov quotes Mr. Poroshenko on Sunday when the water was delivered to the road checkpoint 32. And it was done on Sunday. However, the President said about this on Saturday. 116 people there got either 200 or 300 liters of water. But this was done 24 hours after the President said that this was done. When the alarm was there for quite some time. We have written about this for a week on our censor.net. On the 14th, the road was completely closed. On the 15th, the convoy was able to reach there, and most of the guys either died or their machinery was destroyed. One vehicle was able to make it to the road checkpoint. Any other questions, colleagues? Thank you very much for coming to us with this topic. I ask you to inform us about the situation on road checkpoint 31. Dear colleagues,